Hello, and welcome to today's panel, where we'll be discussing disability representation and accessibility in media. My name is Pascal, my pronouns are she, her, and I work at Liberty Resources, Philadelphia's only center for independent living. My colleagues here and I have been working for disability justice for years, advocating with people with disabilities for their civil rights. And with that, I will allow our panel to introduce themselves.
I'm Izzy. My pronouns are she and they. I am a disabled person, very proud. I am the Vice President of Disability Pride, Pennsylvania, and I work as an Assistive Technology Coordinator for TechOwl, the Assistive Technology Program for Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Dominique Howell, an Independent Living Specialist for Liberty Resources. And I am also an ADAPT member, and so I fight for disability justice personally and professionally. It's good to be here.
Now, we all met working at Liberty Resources, which again is a center for independent living that advocates for people with disabilities. And I'll be the first to admit, when I first started working at Liberty, I thought I was activist A1. I was calling people out on colorism, transphobia, classism, misogyny, and disability rights just was not on my radar. If you were to ask me at the time what accessibility looked like, I would have said, I don't know, a ramp, maybe closed captions, but accessibility is so much more than that.
Yeah, it is a lot more than that. Accessibility really benefits everyone. It's not about just people with disabilities. Accessibility is about making sure everyone has a chance to achieve the goals that they need to meet.
I totally agree, Izzy. I mean, what would it be like if the world was completely inaccessible? We would be locked in, unable to do things in the community, unable to live autonomously, and just be stuck. What would that be like? You know, it's just unfair. So accessibility is the right way for everyone to live. It gives everyone to be inclusive and diverse and practice equity.
Mm-hmm. And I think there are like different types of accessibility. There's like tech access. I think even attitudes can be accessible, and like sensory access, web accessibility, it just goes beyond.
Yeah, there's this wonderful social model of disability which says that we are not disabled because of our diagnosis. We are disabled by society and the way society limits our abilities to act. Is that something that you agree with?
I totally agree with it. I mean, I experience that daily, and our consumers at Liberty Resources experience that. And so it's about meeting us where we are and not society, not us meeting society.
Yeah, I think that's what we do at TechOwl too, is we meet people where they are and they have a goal that they want to meet, and we try to make it accessible for them, like provide the device or whatever they need to make that happen.
Because it turns out, shockingly, that people with disabilities can do all, if not most, of the things that able-bodied people can do, just maybe in a different way with different technology, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's get down to it. How can media and our neighborhoods be more accessible for everybody?
I think, well, with media, we need to make sure that every television show has access to closed captioning and subtitles and, different lighting and, representation, physical representation as far as wheelchair users, deaf actors, and people who are blind. We need to see that representation because in order to grow, we need to be able to see it firsthand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think like with media accessibility specifically, there's a lot of ways to make media accessible. Like beyond just television or movies, there's books, there's listening to music, all of that is also media.
Yes.
So there are lots of different ways to just view the world. Even like we have a device in our lending library for TechOwl PA that is the OrCam, and it's the OrCam My Eye, and it's like a little device that attaches to a pair of glasses, and it can literally tell you what is in front of you if you're blind. So like it'll tell you if you're watching a TV show, like what the captions are saying, or it'll be able to describe the people in front of you. So I think like media can be a lot more accessible, and our neighborhoods can also be more accessible too.
That's so cool. I feel like when accessibility comes up, a lot of times people envision completely revamping the entire system, and they don't realize how easy it is to incorporate accessibility into our day-to-day lives. I mean, we see it all the time, even in our environments, when you have, the crosswalks that make a noise when it's time for you to walk. Like, that's assistive technology, right? Even curb cuts. Yes, of course, they're there for wheelchair users, but how many parents with strollers utilize those? How many people lugging their luggage use those? Or even the automatic door openers. I mean, I don't have a physical disability, but there are plenty of times when I don't want to touch a door handle, where I'm really grateful that there's assistive technology in my environment.
For me, speaking of what Pat said, that is access to media, right? So if we have a ramp to get into a movie theater, that's access to media. If we're able to see, to go across the street, to make sure we're going in the right direction, to access a store or a theater or some kind of TV station like PhillyCAM. If we have those things that allow us to get there, that's access to media.
Yeah, like the fact that we're in here, we know that there were no barriers to really getting inside. And that's really nice to know.
Dominique, you mentioned representation of disabilities. What representation of disability, or even what does access, when it seems like people are portraying accessibility in media, what kind of representations do we tend to see of people with disabilities and accessibility?
Well, in a negative light, we normally see people who are not disabled playing people who are disabled. And a lot of us in the disability community feel that that is the wrong way to go, because we can act, we can sing, we can dance. It's just a different way. We adapt differently. So negatively, it affects us a great deal because it doesn't really show representation. And so how can we as people really take heed to what we're seeing on media, during movies, in books, in magazines, artists? How can we really be close with the artist or close with the actor if we don't see ourselves?
Not to mention that it keeps disabled actors and performers from getting paychecks, right?
For sure,
It only perpetuates that underemployment of people with disabilities.
And that's an ongoing stereotype that we continue to fight. And just to plug it, this month is Employment Disability Month for people with disabilities. So it goes along with anything that we're saying. It's all about access to media. And, acting and music is all employment. So I agree with you completely.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, that actors with disabilities are professionals who need jobs like anyone else. And I wanted to go back to like the stereotypes that we might see in media.
Yeah.
Because doing my research and just growing up in the world being disabled, I haven't seen a lot of disabled people playing disabled characters, but I've seen a lot of characters with disabilities that tend to be like on the villainous side or tend to be like monsters.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, like zombies, the way that they limp and walk, kind of like people with cerebral palsy, like me.
And like me. So, yeah.
Even Scar from The Lion King, Captain Hook. What other examples of disability as villainy can you think of for our audience?
I mean, if we're talking about mental disability, we're always seeing the crazy person, the psycho, the spaz. And so those are words that we don't even use in the community, but that's what we're always saying. And it's always, a crazy person that is attacking another person. Why can't it just be that? That is in most movies that we see. It's in most television shows. And I mean, I get their point to a degree because you're trying to create suspense and be more, impactful, but there's another way to handle it. Let's get away from that narrative and put some positivity into it.
And even like the positive stereotypes of people with disabilities in media are not as so good. Like I'm thinking of like people with developmental disabilities, like The Good Doctor, Atypical, Rain Man, those are all characters that have disabilities, but they were not played by people with disabilities. So,
And even if it's a person that's a great actor, you know, I've watched Atypical, I've watched Good Doctor. They're really good actors, but it doesn't help people who are, you know, who really have developmental disabilities or any disability, because it's like, well, that doesn't mean that I could get the role. Obviously, they would give it to someone who doesn't have what I have. So it's counterproductive, really.
I've also seen like the wise blind person. Like that is just such a trope in movies. And like we need to elevate that. Like disabled characters can be multifaceted people. They can have different sides, different layers. Yeah.
Yeah, disability is so often used as a metaphor, almost, in media, either for objects of inspiration or to inspire fear. You know, Dom, when you were talking about people with psychological disabilities, I couldn't help but remember that that population is far more likely to be on the receiving end of violence than to actually behave violently. But I actually read a report recently that said that horror films were the one genre of media where people with disabilities were regularly represented, and they were almost entirely represented as villains, as monsters. So how do you think that contributes to society's view of disabilities?
That contributes in a negative light, and it just perpetuates the stereotype of what they think that we can't do and what they think that we're not allowed to do. And it continues to shun us from being in the community and being a part of media.
Yeah, I think it keeps, like, the stereotypes keep us from seeing, like, psychological health and psychological disorders as, like, normal, because they are normal. Like, people are going to experience different things in their mind, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, and October being Halloween month, it's the month for horror movies. So everyone in the audience, when you're watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre or the Halloween movies or Hills Have Eyes, there are so many horror films that show disability as a product of incest and therefore moral failing.
If not all of them.
If not all of them. It is rough. It's hard to think of a horror film or even any film that represents people with disabilities in a just way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So let's bring it back to tech. What does advocacy for accessibility in media look like? Izzy, you mentioned Tech Owl. So what are some practical things that are available to people now if they want to make their media more accessible?
Yes, I love that question. So at Tech Owl, we have a device lending library, and anyone can borrow devices. You don't necessarily have to have a disability, but we encourage people with disabilities to borrow, but sometimes physical therapists will borrow from it, sometimes occupational therapists will borrow. But we have lots of different things. We have personal listening devices that can go around your neck, and you can hear like the TV better. You won't have to turn it up a bunch. We have phones that are really loud and have very bright ringers for anyone. Like if you have low vision, you'll be able to use it. If you're deaf, you'll be able to use it.
Right.
We have phones that have screens that go with them so that people can read what they're saying to each other. That's also can be part of media. And then we have different like software that you can borrow. Screen readers and things like that to make your computer and access to the web more accessible. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that we have. I can't go through all of them. We have Chromebooks and AAC devices as well.
So for our audience, what does AAC stand for?
Yeah, augmented. I actually don't know.
Oh, I
what
didn't
it
mean to
stands
put you
for.
on the
That's
spot.
okay. It's like augmented communication. So using a device to communicate. Whatever that looks like.
That's so cool. Dom, you and I have had conversations around how a lot of times a non-disabled society will see accommodations as a luxury or something that people with disabilities should be grateful for.
For sure.
Talk to me about your experience with that.
My experience, which happens quite often, is that people think well, let me rephrase. So people who are on the higher end of income, so the 1% or upper middle class believe that a door opener should automatically go in their home when people in my community and people that I serve as consumers, we don't get that option. And so, but a lot of people think that we don't deserve it. And so that is why we fight for access into buildings, into restaurants, into movie theaters, into TV stations. That's why we fight for that access, because accessibility is not just geared towards disability, it's geared toward everyone. And accessibility, whether it be in media, whether it's on the street, whether it's in your home, it's just what it is, and it helps the world be a better place and more inclusive and diverse and equitable.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think advocacy can look like so many different things. And like what you do, Dom, is awesome and gets people out into the community. And I also think like talking to your legislators is really, really important, especially about any kind of civil rights laws that are on the books today. Like at any point, things can change. Clearly, we have seen that in the past few months. So we really have to kind of be diligent as a community and loop in like our family and friends to all of this information too, because they might not be aware. And we do have to educate.
We definitely need allies. We are stronger in numbers, and it shows that it is an important issue, not to just the disability community, but to all of us. You know what I mean? So it is important that you do talk to your legislators, that you do go to your neighbors and say like, look, I can't access this. Can you help me? Can you not patronize this business? Can you not watch this movie? Can you not go into this movie theater? In order to make a difference, we kind of have to do those things. And so it's very important that, especially in media, because media is becoming the #1 thing. Social media, music, it's really taken off, in such a way that I am, surprised about. Speaking of, music, we have a couple of artists, big artists, Lizzo and Beyonce, who took the word spaz out of both of their songs because the disability community and their allies spoke up. So it is very important to use your voice and use your power.
And I think another way we can do that is by hosting disability pride events like we do with Disability Pride PA. Getting people together to just revel in the joy of being disabled and like the joy of just knowing that there aren't any barriers right in this moment, right now. We can be together, we can just stim if we need to stim, we can be ourselves in that kind of place. And it's really powerful. And there should be more spaces for us to do that.
Absolutely. Now, some people in our audience might be wondering, there's the ADA, what more do we need? So you already laughed, Izzy. So tell me why the ADA doesn't automatically fix these issues. And for the audience, the ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act.
So one big thing is that the ADA itself as a law doesn't really have a governing in the United States government. So it is up to disability activists and advocates and everyone who works in the scope of it and our allies to really fight for what is wrong and to really advocate for change. That is why it's a really big deal. And I know it's a big thing. It's been around for 32 years, but we, even though we've gone so far, especially with access, we have so far to go because there is no one that can just say, oh no, this is like wrong. There's no governance. We have to bring it to the attention of the lawmakers, Congress, and all of that. And it differentiates state by state, honestly, depending on what the state feels is necessary, unfortunately.
Not people with disabilities, the state.
Yeah, the state. So Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, California, the state. So, I mean, not even just with the ADA, but we see that with Roe versus Wade and so many other issues is that the state and the government is taking over, and we're losing our autonomy because of it. So it's
And-
kind of a sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
So it's
Medical
just
access for people with disabilities is already, there's so many barriers already, particularly people who need to get pap smears or regular mammograms, or if they're pregnant. There's so many physical barriers, but as you said, also attitudinal barriers as well. So what I'm hearing is that the ADA has no regulatory body. So there is no one in government whose job it is to go around making sure things are accessible. And it is on the individual to be their own legal expert. Is that what I'm hearing about the ADA?
Yes, to bring
Okay.
it to the government, not the
Right.
government to say, this is completely wrong, we need to fix this, we need to implement what the ADA is. It works backwards, which is sad. I mean, we've gotten far because of all the activist and advocate work that we've done over the last 32 years, but it should be the other way around.
We should have more disabled people in public access.
Absolutely.
Like, that's just so important, like in public service. Because I think the people at the table who are making these laws, who are like creating these situations for us, don't really know what it actually means to like live our lives.
And it takes it back to media, right? So you see all these politicians on the news, in ads, in the paper, and you don't see anyone who represents yourself. And you're like, I want to advocate. I want to be a politician. I want to be a congressman. I want to be a judge, but you don't see yourself. So you're wondering, can I do this? Will they allow me to do this? What will this look like? Representation matters. Media is everywhere.
Yeah, that's so real. Especially when you think about how common disabilities are. 1 in 5 people on the planet have a disability.
Yes.
That's an enormous minority experience.
Yes.
So why do you think it's seen as such a niche issue? Does it have anything to do with the long history of segregation of able-bodied and disabled people? What do you think?
I mean, I think there are just a lot of things that we are taught about disability from a small age. And we kind of grow up in a society that's very,
One-sided.
yes, thank you.
Very diplomatically
very
said.
one-sided,
One-sided.
ableist.
I was gonna try. I was thinking of not a so good word, so I was like one-sided. But ableist is a great word. I mean, we are in a world where, the hierarchy of everything is one-sided. I mean, going back to what I just mentioned about Roe versus Wade, one-sided. Disability access, one-sided. Black Lives Matter, one-sided. LGBTQIA, all the things that all the marginalized groups fought for, fought because the government and society thinks it's one-sided. And what people don't realize a lot of times is that all of those groups, when it comes to people with disabilities, are interdisciplinary. So we all are people who are within other groups, which leads us to be, unfortunately, lower on the totem pole because we're stacked against way more than people who are not disabled.
But I always say you can become disabled at any
At
moment.
any time.
And join the club.
That's
Yes,
right.
agreed.
Like COVID has shown us that. A lot of people have gotten long COVID and now are working through that and learning about accessibility and learning about what it's like to be disabled in the society. And they're like, oh my God, this is so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said about intersectionality, Dom, and I think that's so important to any movement, but I think particularly for the disability rights movement. So one of the things that I love about it is that we're not even asking people in the audience to take on a brand new cause, right? Any cause that you already care about, women's rights, workers' rights,
Yes.
sex education, prison abolition, Black Lives Matter, even if you're one of those men's rights activist people,
You'll
it touches the
find
lives
it.
of people with disabilities. There are children in cages at the borders who have disabilities. 40% of people in solitary confinement have a diagnosed psychiatric disability. That means they have the privilege of getting a diagnosis. And people with disabilities are the #2 minority group to be on the receiving end of police violence. So I think that intersectionality is really important. And just do a little history lesson, the Black Panthers worked a lot with disability rights activists, if you want to do some homework, audience members.
And I mean, you know, this conversation is based on media, but all of this work that Pascal is talking about was seen in media, but it wasn't seen in media. You get what I'm saying? So it's important that even if we're talking about doing justice work, that it's seen in media and seen from our lens and not the lens of society.
That's such a good point, Dom. Why is it important that people in Philadelphia, across the country, across the world, are able to see disability activists fighting for civil rights? Why is that important?
It's important really because you see the importance of it. You see why it matters. Because if we're just talking about it, right, and we're just writing about it, and you don't visually see it or visually hear it, you won't know the importance. You won't understand the passion that us as disability activists and advocates have and all that we fought for. And you won't see us on the front lines if you just are reading about it in a textbook that 9 times out of 10 is flawed.
Yeah, for a long time, before I moved to Philadelphia, I didn't know that disabled people had rights. Like, I didn't know that I could ask for accommodations. Or honestly, I would kind of like shrug them off because I would be like, I don't want to look more disabled than I am. But that's like ableism that I was taught. So it's really important.
And, you know, to that point, Izzy, that's a stigma brought on by society, but more so brought on by the lack of representation in media. You know, if we saw ourselves, because even though I knew that I had rights, if I saw myself more, I wouldn't be like, oh, I don't want to be shown that I'm disabled. I don't want to use my wheelchair on social media, just a personal story. Years ago, I'm older now. Years ago, I used to make sure I got out of the wheelchair to take a picture. Make sure that even if the wheelchair was in the picture, it was cropped a certain way so no one would know. And not because, my family and friends didn't know, just because I knew it was being social and that the world would see it. And so I felt like I had to meet the world and not the world meet me. And I know a lot of consumers and a lot of people that are disabled feel this way, so. A bigger issue. But it's getting better because a lot of us are on the front lines. Izzy's on the front lines, I'm on the front lines,
Sure.
Pascal's on the front lines, Liberty is, Tech Owl, Disability Pride is really on the front lines. So we're out there, we just want to push it forward more. It's very important to do so for the next generation in the future.
Yeah, because I would have not known about disability rights if I hadn't met the people that I met here in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is like a historically activist-centered city, so I think it's perfect that I came here and discovered that. I didn't even know we had like a history or a culture until I went to a Disability Pride event.
And we're so glad you're here, Izzy. We are.
I'm
You're
happy
such a
to.
great person, and you know so much, and you've given so much to our community. So we're glad to have you here as a Philadelphian.
Oh, thank you. You
Whether
too,
you consider
though.
yourself or not, But so it's important. It's important for people to know, especially coming into the city, like this is what Philadelphia does. And I appreciate PhillyCAM for allowing us to have this platform so that more people, hopefully disabled folks, see us and say like, oh, there's Disability Pride, there's Tech Out, there's Liberty Resources, there's activists. This is what they do, and I want to be a part. So.
And there are jobs in activism too. There are jobs in nonprofits. There are jobs in media for people with disabilities. There's different like coalitions of like music recording artists that support each other with disabilities. So there are communities out there. You just have to find them.
And finding your community is so important. If I may piggyback on your story, I didn't realize that I had a disability until I started working at Liberty Resources. I mean, maybe 3 years into working at Liberty Resources, because I had my own internalized ableism. You know, I knew that depression was considered a disability, but not for me, right? Like, oh, and I had all of these reasons why. Like, oh, I don't want to take resources away. I had all of these good Samaritan reasons why I wasn't disabled. And it took several of my friends calling me in lovingly, kind of calling me out, you know, thank goodness, and, you know, talking to me about how my experiences reflects their experience and how not all disability is visible to the eyes. Right. And I also learned within the past year that I'm on the autism spectrum. It's a really, so I really want to bring home that that community is so powerful, because people with disabilities are the experts on their experience far more than the researchers are, than scientists, than doctors. Because a lot of people, particularly who are on the spectrum, if they read research about what autism spectrum disorder looks like, they're like, oh, that's not me. But I actually spoke with people who had autism, and I realized, like, oh, I get along with this group of people so well for a reason. So yeah, community is so important. Representation is so important, because we find each other. We find ourselves when we find each other.
So Pascal, just to piggy off your personal story, do you think that's because you didn't see it in media enough to identify it in yourself?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, autism is portrayed in one way, one particular way. We never see the rainbow of spectrum of the symptoms of it. And I think that's the same way with a lot of disabilities. It's portrayed in one narrow way, and it leads to people's experience being invalidated in real life. Because people will think, oh, I saw this movie, and therefore I'm more of an expert than you. Right. When you're watching flawed media. Right. You're being informed from flawed media.
Yeah, that reminds me of just an example in media. Oftentimes we see like movies where someone becomes disabled or like quadriplegic.
Yes.
And then they like immediately it's like, okay, your life's over. Like there's nothing left to live for. Okay, whatever. Like that's the movie. That's like the plot of the movie. Like,
and then there's always some person, usually able-bodied, who becomes a devotee. And
what's a devotee for the audience?
So a devotee is a person who is somewhat obsessed with another person just because they have a disability, or wants to be with them because of their disability, not necessarily because of the person that they are and what attributes they have. And so in movies, a lot of times, I'm thinking about all the movies that I can think where someone became disabled, or you know, was having some difficulty and then got in an accident or whatever the case may be. There's always a devotee character where they become obsessed with helping them and making sure that they're okay, but not in the way of like offering autonomy, but in the way of like sheltering them and taking over their lives. And so that's a great example.
Yeah, it's more about them.
Yeah, definitely about them and their ableist mindset and their selfishness versus the actual person that is experiencing the disability.
Yeah, I think that devotee character is there so that the able-bodied audience members
can feel better
about themselves.
For sure.
Yes. If I may also inject a story, we have a friend, for privacy reasons I won't name him, but he is a wheelchair user and he's married to a beautiful professional who works in the medical field. They were going down the street one day in West Philly on Baltimore Avenue, and she must have still had her scrubs on, and they're madly in love. And so they're kissing and giggling and holding hands and you know, being in love. And this woman, able-bodied woman, sees them and feels so confident that she knows what's going on. She crosses the street and yells at our friend's wife, How dare you? You should be taking care of this poor man. You're taking advantage of him. The idea that our friend, a man in a wheelchair, could have courted, fallen in love with, married a able-bodied, beautiful, professional woman was so out of the realm of possibility that she felt comfortable crossing the street and yelling at a complete stranger because she wanted to be the good star, gold Samaritan, and it's ridiculous because it really infantilizes people with disabilities.
It does, and I had a similar situation. I'm not in a relationship, but I have a daughter, and she at the time was about maybe 5, and she stands on my footrest, which you all can't see, just because she's 5 and she's tired, and she kept jumping off the footrest and jumping off the footrest, and I kept saying, you can't jump off the footrest, you're going to fall. And these people, same as our friend, came across the street and said, you're a horrible mother. I'm going to call DHS, which is Department of Human Services. You people, the famous line that we get as disabled folks is, you people shouldn't have children. You people shouldn't, be married. She just went on this whole tangent. Scared my daughter, scared myself, almost made me miss the bus because she's yelling. But this goes back to one ableist mindset, but it also goes back to what society is showing the people who have this ableist mindset. They're not showing parents with disabilities on television. They're not showing people who are madly in love that are, either two people who are disabled or one person is disabled and the other person not be a devotee. They're not showing two LGBTQIA couples that are disabled. They're not showing that. And so people who already have society's viewpoint, what they think is correct, come up to people like me and people like our friend and people like Izzy and say these things because of what they don't see in media. Not exactly about what they do see, but it's more about what they don't see.
Mm-hmm. Those moments are really arresting too. Like, you're just going about living your life, like nothing's happening, and then suddenly someone's coming up to you saying all of this wild stuff, and it's like, okay, whoa, like you don't know my life. I've had a similar experience, but it's more like somebody came up to my partner who is non-disabled, and they congratulated him basically and like prayed for him, and they were like, oh my God, it's so great that you can take care of her, and that's not really our relationship at all. Like it was so weird. We were out like on a date, like, yeah, so just think about it. There's no disability police. You don't need to be disability police.
Ma'am, I have a master's degree. No one needs to take care of me.
Right. And this is why it's just so important to have representation in media. And this is why we as advocates, because we all are advocates, are advocating for access to all different things. And even though we don't necessarily do media all the time, it all intertwines and it all makes a difference so that people are represented. People are represented at Disability Pride. People are represented at Liberty Resources. People are represented when we go on actions and do things like this. So it is very important. So that we don't have to keep seeing the same old narrative. Inspiration porn. Oh, you're so lucky. Oh, you're so lucky to have him, not even just the other way around. Like, we're so lucky that someone wanted to have a child with us or someone wanted to marry us. Because who would have thought, right? But that's, again, what is the issue with media and why it is important to advocate and why we do the work that we do. Not to speak for you all, but I would say that that's part of the reason why you all got into the work that you do.
100%. Yeah, the environment, the people around me, it was not reflecting like who I am or like what my experience is. So I was like, I have to do something about this. I can't just like sit back. And I remember coming to Philly, and like the second year I was here, I started to get a little more brazen with people and like a little bit more like whatever. And I was walking out of a store that had stairs, and I was very carefully holding on to the door because it was supporting me. And I feel the door, like someone grabbed the door, and I almost fell over, and I was like, don't do that. Like, I know how to use a door to help myself. Like just, maybe we're getting into like general discussion of disability, but like it's good to ask somebody if they need help first.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so does that mean that no one should offer help? Or does it mean that there's a certain right way to offer help? What is that? Is it that do you not want people to interact with you at all out in public? What's the right way to go about it? Because that's obviously the wrong way to go about it, right? Is there a right way to offer help?
Yeah, I think just walking up to someone and saying, hey, you need help? You want some assistance?
And then if you say no, they should believe you.
Yes, and just leave us alone.
I mean, going back to media real quick, even in media, it's like, people say, well, you can't be a dancer because you're in a wheelchair. You can't be an actor because you're deaf. You can't be a singer because you're blind, or, simple things. But it's one, here at Liberty, we believe in dignity of the right to risk. And so I challenge the people who are not disabled that are watching this, if you think that in your mind and you are, ableist, be conscious about the fact that it is our lives, and, unless we say we can't or we shouldn't, don't say it for us. So, don't grab on to my wheelchair. That happened today. And it happened with the Uber driver, and I was like, I said not to do it, and he did it anyway. And so, but that's a conscious thing. But again, that's because they don't see it represented. And it is very important to find a magazine and, visit websites like Tech Owl and Disability Pride in order to be able to see what we look like in our daily lives and what we do for our folks.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we have Disability Pride events, it makes us very visible to the community. Like we're purposefully walking down, we're doing a parade down the street. Like it's about showing our pride and being like, what, we take up space in this society. We are here, we belong here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when I'm thinking about, or while you're talking, I was trying to think of representations of people with disabilities in love. And the only one that I could think of was that film, Me Before You. Oh. Ooh, so cringe.
Yeah.
So for anyone who doesn't know, it's about this young, rich, handsome playboy who gets hit by a car and acquires either paraplegia or quadriplegia. To be fair, I can't recall. But Khaleesi from Game of Thrones is his aide, and they fall in love. And of course, there's an able-bodied suitor, and no one understands why she would be falling in love with a disabled man. And at the end, he opts for assisted suicide because she doesn't deserve to have to live this life where she's taking care of poor him. And so he leaves her all of this money so she can have the life that she deserves. And that is the only example in media of a person in love who has a disability. That is what we see, that's what we get.
Yeah, I mean, on a bigger scale, going back to Atypical, it was, the man was autistic. And he started dating this person, this woman, young girl, who was not disabled, even though, just to say, I think she had a disability. But how they posed the character, anyway. So, but there were a lot of different tropes before she got to understand who he was as an individual. And there were tropes about his attitude and, how he handles things, not understanding. And that went on for many episodes, right? And so they had to come together. And I had an issue with that because if you just play it for what it is, then, other people can see like, oh no, you can love without condition instead of learning to like fall into crap, because that's really what ended up happening. So, unfortunately, we don't have enough representation of love, of any kind of love when it comes to any disability. We don't have enough. We don't have enough actors or actresses or folks that see each other in media. So it's really sad, and I really feel bad for the younger generation. I really do, because it's so much social media out there, but they don't see themselves. I am in my 30s, and so I didn't have social media as a representation. So I didn't have to worry about it. I just, wherever my community was, my community was. But so many people are focused on the internet and they don't get to see themselves, and that's just so disheartening.
I think one of the things we do at Tech Owl PA is we do a TikTok, and we do TikTok videos. And our TikTok is just like, when I go through the For You page, it's just all people with disabilities, all these activists. It's
you
great.
gotta love it.
We have managed to get our algorithm to be that way. But when I go to my own TikTok, I don't see a lot of people with disabilities, even though I'm searching for it. So I feel like it's almost suppressed on these platforms as well. That could be a whole other conversation.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, even though it could be a whole nother conversation, I really think it's on purpose because, they want to pity us, and society feels like everybody doesn't need to see us because in their mind, it's a bad representation, while in our mind, it's a good representation. So that's why we continue to fight for what we're doing.
Yeah, we still see disability as this taboo subject that's supposed to be out of sight. You're not supposed to talk about it. I know people who they don't even want to say the word disabled, or they'll whisper it, she's disabled, as if it's taboo. But again, 1 in 5 people on the planet, that's a pretty common piece of the diverse tapestry of the human experience. Yeah. So tell me, what are the most urgent goals for the fight for accessibility in the city?
For us, it's always transportation and sidewalk justice. Because
that's right, winter's coming up.
As we know, Philadelphia is a historic town. And so we deal with a lot of issues of buildings and sites being grandfathered in and not having to deal with accessibility changes like ramps or elevators. And so we, as Liberty Resource Advocates, and also myself as an ADAPT member, and Pascal, we literally fight for accessibility physically, for ramps and for elevators. Liberty has a one-step program, so if you want to go into a business, but it's only one step, we help with that. And so access to media, right? Access to just being a part of the community. So that's our real big thing that we are doing, like accessibility in the community, so that we're able to live independent and full lives and be inclusive with the rest of society.
And I would urge you to look up techowlpa.org, because our website has a lot of resources that are free for you to just check out, different apps that make things accessible. Highly recommend it. We have lots of programs too that are for people who are low income. So if you feel like you might qualify for some of those programs, just call us. We're very accessible.
I love how accessibility can be both high tech and low tech. I know I mentioned that winter's coming up because I know that people have a habit of shoveling their snow into the curb cut, so that people with wheelchairs or parents with strollers or whoever else needs to use them they're unable to use the curb cuts, which stops them from not only leaving their house or going across the street, but accessing public transportation.
Or going to work.
I was going to say that a lot of us sometimes decide when it's snowing, okay, we're just not going to go out. So we're going to have all the food brought to us and all the things. And that really can have negative effects, right? You're not able to be with your friends and family and work and be in the community. And we are always and have constantly fought to be in the community. So when people shovel their snow on the sidewalk, in a ramp or, in a parking spot, it really is disheartening to us and really pisses us off, not to be so polite, because we can't access everything. And so that is a big issue.
It's frustrating. It just is. We have to work together to make things more accessible. I also think attending as many committee meetings as you can for SEPTA, if you can, just get into the city government too and talk to people.
And there's a Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities that has a public meeting once a month that I think you all watching, whether disabled or not, should join because there are 17 different commissioners for 17 different sectors of disability within the city. And so it's important to know what is going on, how you can be a part, and what you can do for your specific neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I know that SEPTA is doing surveys to revamp their buses and their trolleys. I mean, I don't know if people know this, but none of the trolleys in West Philly are accessible for people with physical disabilities.
Right.
So I had a friend who worked with us. He lived 2 blocks away from me. It took me a half hour to get to work. It took him almost an hour.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same distance, but he could not use the trolleys. He had to go take one bus to another bus to one MFL stop. If the elevator at that MFL stop was broken, he had to wait for another bus to go to another MFL stop. I mean, it's nonstop.
It's nonstop. And unfortunately, the trolleys, that'll be a longer ask.
Yeah.
But I do know that, for the Broad Street line, which is the subway, they are constantly breaking ground. They just broke ground at
Tasker Morris, right?
Tasker Morris, which is great because folks have been having to go all the way around to get off right there. And they're going to break ground at Broad Neary, which is great because Temple is right there. And so it's important to be able to do that, access to all those things. And Tech Owl isn't too far, so that is very important to be able to access any things that they need for media or resources. So that is, something that we're always a part of. There is a SEPTA Advisory Committee board that meets monthly as well, and a lot of LRI folks are on those meetings, and there is always an interpreter, which is very positive. A part of the positive things that are happening to access the media, and also at the Mayor's Commission on Disability, there's usually an interpreter those meetings. So we do have that, but we also not only want that for stuff that we are fighting for justice for, we want that just for leisure, because leisure is a big part, especially during this ongoing COVID saga pandemic. So many people have had to stay home and watch Netflix and watch more TV and more movies and read more magazines and listen to music, and they're still lacking access. And so that is why it is important that we all come together and utilize the resources like Tech Out, and utilize the resources that Liberty Resources has, and all the stuff that the city is trying their best to facilitate.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite slogans of the disability rights movement is "Nothing about us without us." Can you speak about what that means to you both?
I think it just means don't make decisions on our behalf. We know we are our experts. We have the wisdom.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that. I mean, without us, we don't get what we need. Mm-hmm. And so it is important that you, the people, allow us to speak for ourselves. So it is a big thing. My favorite is Piss on Pity, right? Again, it's a little bit vulgar, but not too much. We don't want, the disability community doesn't want pity. We want equity. We want access. We want equality. We want autonomy. That's the kind of things that we want. And so it is important, again, for representation to give us that, so that you don't, as the ableist watcher or ableist society, say, oh, I'm going to pity them. I'm going to, have inspiration porn to make everyone feel bad for you instead of celebrating you and who you are.
And for the audience, can you give an example of what inspiration porn is? It's not actual porn, right?
No, not actual pornography. That's a good plug. So inspiration porn is more so you see like a Shriners commercial, and you're like, oh, please buy this blanket for these ailing children who won't have much longer to live, and we need your money, and this, like that kind of thing, where it's like, feel sorry for us to give us money. Not celebrating the fact that we play basketball, or we sing, or we dance, or, you know, we work, we're moms, we're dads, we're in relationships. They don't do that. They do it the opposite to make people feel bad. So that's a classic example of inspiration porn that I see every day on television, which it's just horrible.
We're multi-dimensional people.
Yes.
Turns out you're human beings.
Just like you, and you, and you, and you.
All right, well, as we wrap up, we've criticized a lot of media. Do you have any recommendations of good representations in media?
So, to plug the great activist and artist, Johnny Crescendo, AKA Alan Holdsworth, there is a great movie on Netflix. It's not that long, so if you're a person that doesn't sit long enough to watch a movie, it's called When Barbara Met Alan. It is about the disability movement in the UK, and it is fabulous. So it's on there right now. I don't know how long it will be on there, so if you see this today, watch it. It's like an hour and 10 minutes. It is fabulously done, and guess what? They're all disabled actors and actresses. So it's great.
Yeah, I can't think of like fictional media, but Crip Camp is a really good idea to watch. Crip Camp is like, it's about a summer camp for disabled people. It's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can only think of like documentaries or educators.
But it's still good to have representation, because 4 years ago we weren't having that. And so I'm appreciative that Alan and Barbara and Judy Human, they decided, like, look, the world needs to see us, and so we're going to film this. And it's just a great start in the right direction, I think.
I also love Deafies in Drag. Do you know Deafies in Drag? They're wonderful. It's an all-deaf drag troupe. They're fantastic.
And it's Coda?
Coda, yep, Oscar-winning disabled artist.
Yes. I think that was on Apple.
Oh, was it?
TV?
Oh, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So Coda's on Apple TV. Barbara Met Alan is on Netflix, and Crip Camp is on Netflix.
Yep.
So check those out.
All right, and you guys have anything you want to plug? Any websites people should go to if we want to find out about more about ADAPT or Tech Owl or Liberty Resources?
So Liberty Resources is www.libertyresources.org. ADAPT is www.nationaladapt.org. Izzy?
www.techowlpa.org and www.disabilitypridepa.org. Check them out.
Well, this has been so much fun. You two are some of my favorite people, and I'm so excited that we were able to hang out for this hour and talk about stuff that we're passionate about.
It was great. I really appreciate you all asking me to be a part. And we hope that the city and PhillyCAM allows us to continue this movement, just to talk about what we're doing, what we're proud of, and where we're going.
Let them try and stop us.
They can't stop us, because nothing about us
without us.
Yes. And piss on what?
Who? Pity.
Okay.
Piss on pity.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you check out those websites and keep an eye out for ableist media and positive representations of disability in media.
And if you see something that is ableist, have a conversation about it. If you watch this, give them the resources. Let's start the conversation today and continue it.
Yeah, I love that, Dom, today.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.